find it quite interesting. Isn't it interesting how people would encourage you to not focus on systemic racism or racism, period? And even if you're not focusing on it, you may be focused on, bigger, greater, and more positive things, things of a, higher vibe and things. But is it too far-fetched to say that the individuals who are invested in what systemic racism is, that they never cease to want to remind you or show you of the past, the horrors, and the things that are very dark and evil about the history of this country. And they can never wait to expose themselves and to remind everyone that they actually exist, that the evil still exists, and that those people who are evil and practice demonic practices and demonic rituals, they never hesitate to remind the world that they still exist.
PD. But for decades, if you were Black or Asian, your test results were automatically adjusted downwards, making it harder to be diagnosed with different conditions. But to understand how that device plays into systemic racism, we have to rewind through history. Starting in 1795. It was then that Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, wrote in Notes on the State of Virginia without evidence that enslaved Africans had weaker lungs than white people. Then in 1846 came along English surgeon John Hutchinson, who created the spirometer. He made it as a useful medical tool for measuring lung disease and military fitness. In the United States, a Louisiana doctor named Samuel Cartwright took that tool and used it on enslaved people. He claimed that the spirometer proved that Thomas Jefferson was right, that Black people had lower lung capacity. He even argued that slavery was good for them because forced labor supposedly revitalized their lungs. But here's where the systemic part comes into play. Instead of rejecting the myth, medicine absorbed it. By the 20th century, spirometers came with something called a race correction. If you were Black, your lung results were automatically lowered by 10 to 15%, and if you were Asian, by 4 to 6%. In fact, up until 2021, up to date, the world's most utilized medical reference by doctors still said that Black patients had lower lung function as if it were a biological fact. That race correction meant that what was labeled abnormal for a white patient could be labeled normal for a Black or Asian patient. That led to misdiagnoses, delayed treatments, denied disability claims, and less lung transplants. And the worst part, most doctors didn't even realize that race was adjusting values because it was built directly into the machine. It wasn't until 2022 that the Global Lung Function Initiative released race-neutral equations. And in 2023, the American Thoracic Society recommended a race-neutral approach to reading the pulmonary function tests. Some places are only now just phasing them out. That's what systemic racism is. It's not just one patient being dismissed by the healthcare system. It's racist ideas from 200 years ago, Thomas Jefferson's words, Samuel Cartwright's pseudoscience, being built into a machine and shaping healthcare.
On June 21st, 1964, 3 civil rights workers were speeding down rural backroads of Neshoba County, Mississippi. Their names were James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman. A Black church had recently burned down, and they came to investigate. But now, there were flashing lights behind them. A spy for the state of Mississippi had tipped off the sheriffs that civil rights workers were coming. And the sheriffs were colluding with the Ku Klux Klan. The civil rights workers slowed down the car. Their training said to always stop for police.
For trying to exercise rights, for trying to help others exercise rights, people paid with their lives.
James Chaney was a native of Meridian, Mississippi, who dropped out of high school to join the civil rights movement. Michael Schwerner, a social worker and activist from New York City, moved to Meridian in January 1964. Chaney and Schwerner quickly became friends. Together, they began laying the groundwork for the Mississippi Summer Project, which would bring hundreds of volunteers from colleges across the country to Mississippi to help Black citizens register to vote.
Mississippi public officials viewed it as an invasion. In fact, they called it out loud an invasion. They created statutes to basically harass, investigate, jail people who were involved in the civil rights movement. And in terms of the Ku Klux Klan, this was kind of their call to war.